Do solemnly swear
Do solemnly swear
that I will support, protect, and defend
that I will support, protect, and defend
the Constitution and government of the United States
the Constitution and government of the United States
and the Constitution and government
and the Constitution and government
of the state of Nevada
of the state of Nevada
against all enemies,
against all enemies,
whether domestic or foreign,
whether domestic or foreign,
and that I will bear true faith,
and that I will bear true faith,
allegiance, and loyalty to the same,
allegiance and loyalty to the same,
any ordinance, resolution, or law
any ordinance, resolution, or law
of any state notwithstanding,
of any state notwithstanding,
and that I will perform well and faithfully
and that I will perform well and faithfully
all the duties of Utility Advisory Committee
all the duties of Utility Advisory Committee
of Boulder City, Nevada,
of Boulder City, Nevada,
on which I'm about to enter,
on which I'm about to enter.
so help me God,
So help me God,
under the pains and penalties of perjury.
under the pains and penalties of perjury.
Thank you. Let's start here. I need to sign
Okay.
these.
Standing ovation. We're standing.
Power is yours.
So that just states what we said. Yeah.
And great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess we're done.
That's it. Yeah. It's official. Sign. Thank you, Officer in Boulder City, Boulder City. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Advisory Committee members. My name is Dennis Porter. I'm Director of Utility Services. I'll go ahead and kick off the meeting since we haven't done the chair and vice chair elections. And as soon as we do that, I'll turn it over to the chair. And again, thank you. For the record, the meeting has been properly noticed and posted. It's July 31st, 2019. We pretty much started on time. We'll start out with public comment, if there is any. Yes, ma'am.
Hi there, my name is Linda Barnett. I've had the privilege of being on the Ad Hoc Utility Committee, so I know just a drop of what you guys are in for, and girls. I wanted to mention on agenda item number 4, discussion of committee future goals. Because I've had that experience and privilege of being a small part of the Ad Hoc Committee, I know that the workload that's ahead for all of you. So I would like to recommend that the committee, when you do discuss how often you're going to meet, that it be no less than once a month. I think that tremendous amount of work, and I think that it would warrant that type of meeting schedule. Thank you.
Judy DeShane. I too was on the ad hoc committee, which doesn't really mean a whole lot. Some of you up there have a whole lot more background than I do in it. But I agree with Linda that I'd like to see you meet once a month because there is a lot to be done, a lot to go over, and a lot, to bring forward that because part of it is we really hope that you as a committee can help the general public understand when there is a need for an increase, why it is. And the more information the public gets, I think the better off things will be received. So I too would encourage the once a month if it's possible. Thank you.
Good evening. For the record, Fred Volt.
I've been thinking a lot about the issues that need to be resolved by the committee in some way or another with recommendations to city staff and the city council for action. And speaking to item number 4, since there isn't a list of items yet on the agenda, I'd like to make a suggestion about some items to include there, either tonight, but probably future because of the OML requirements. So one of the first accountabilities it would seem the committee needs to deal with is reviewing the candidates for utility rate study and engineering assessment of the city's utility infrastructure and provide recommendations on who to hire. Also reviewing the consultant's completed work product and ask clarification questions where necessary. Second, I'd like to see the establishment of where Boulder City is with cumulative spending and budgeting and completion of all existing utility capital projects. Third, gather information from other like-size municipal utilities on best practices for operating procedures and maintenance protocols criteria. Fourth, assess and itemize the future capital needs for the dump, sewer, water, and electric systems based on necessary and nice-to-have initiatives. Fifth, review the short and long-term needs for water, electric, dump, and sewer supplies, as well as capacities. Sixth, review all city utility contracts for how they meet the city's current and future utility needs. Seventh, determine when and whether preemptive maintenance or operate until failure equipment should be pursued, balancing safety, economics, and reliability. Eighth, establish a process for reviewing all completed contract work performed on the city's utility systems for satisfactory workmanship and fulfillment of contract requirements. Ninth, determine if other consultants and/or city employees are needed to fill in technical gaps for satisfactory utility operations. 10th, determine if retraining of existing employees for missing skills would fill gaps in work coverage that currently must be covered by contractors. 11th, assess the appropriateness of current staff allocation between public works and utilities departments. 12th, documenting where $3.5 million of annual utility administration expense is spent. 13th, review cost allocation methodology between the city's utility functions for appropriateness and equity. 14, consider whether all outlays to outside utility vendors over $25,000 need city council approval. Larger projects might also be signed off on by city management, verifying one larger project has not been split into smaller pieces to circumvent this review threshold. 2 more, review out-of-service statistics for water, electric, and sewer, seeking to identify serial failures of infrastructure for remediation. And finally, review the request for proposal process for outside utility contractors to ensure the broadest number of applicants and fairness of the review process. And what I've done is to make enough copies for the recording secretary, the city representative, and members. So you're welcome to have those copies. Thank you.
Thank you. And shame on me, real quick, I would like to introduce Shannon sitting next to me, who's been doing a lot of this work as well, so she'll be helping until we can get some other help. So, next item is item number 1, which is the election of chair and vice chair for the Utility Advisory Committee. It may be that we have some interested members, and it may be that we have some that are too busy and feel they can't do that. So I guess I would just suggest for those of you who are interested to just make that known, and then you guys kind of go through that process of nominating and selecting.
I nominate Larry Carr.
I'm interested.
And I'm interested in chairmanship or the vice chairman, Howard and Allen.
I'm Keith Bacon, and I feel like I'm too busy, so I'll be looking forward to supporting those that are being nominated.
All right, so we have Larry, right? Pen's not working. Larry George, right? And And I'm sorry, Howard. And Eileen, I can't remember, did you mention anything?
I nominated Larry.
You nominated Larry Carr, okay. Okay, so we have 3 who are interested. Of course, we have 2 positions of chair and vice chair. We can each, I think maybe the best way to do it is have each of you select 2 out of the 3, and I guess we can go with whoever gets the most votes, the first 2 win. Does that make any sense? Okay, so we'll start with Howard.
Do I vote for?
Vote for yourself?
Vote for myself?
I would guess so, yes.
And I don't know I only know one other gentleman on the board, or man on the board, so I don't know backgrounds of anybody, and nobody knows mine either, so I don't know how to really say. But I'm sure you're qualified because you're chosen, so. I know George, I don't know anybody else, so I'd say George.
Okay, so Howard. Okay.
So also, not familiar with everybody's background, but I did look at the article that was shared with the community regarding some of the background, and would also like to vote for Howard and also Larry.
Okay, Mr. Carr.
So I guess I'll vote for myself and for George.
I'll vote for myself and for Larry just because he effectively chaired the ad hoc committee, so I know he can do the job effectively.
Gotta make sure I'm getting this right.
I will vote for Larry and Howard.
I will put my 2 in for George Ree and Larry Carr.
Okay, and Eileen?
Larry Carr and George Ree.
George Ree, okay. I think we have an obvious with Larry Carr, if I'm not mistaken. And then 1, 2, 3. George, 1, 2, 3. 2, Howard. Is my math working, George? Yeah, I think that's right. So we agree with each other, so either we're both wrong or both right. So that being said, Larry, you got the most votes, so you win, if you want to call that a win. You would be chair, and George Ree would be vice chair. So congratulations.
Okay.
All right, well, you're pretty much sitting in the right places, so certainly don't have to move. Uh-oh, I don't know what they do with the little presentation. Anyway, so item number 3 is a presentation from me, so you have to listen to me for a little bit.
What happened to item number 2?
Oh, did I skip 2? Oh, my bad. My apologies. Item number 2 is a discussion on committee business rules and regulations. As far as regulations go, we're really talking about open meeting law. I know a number of you have attended the open meeting law training. For those of you that don't, I believe either you will, if you haven't already, you'll be getting a link from us where you can review that same process, and we'll trust you to do that. We'll be following Robert's Rules of Order as far as the meeting goes, so those are kind of the main rules. I did want to just kind of go over quickly the functions we discussed when we created the committee. Obviously, it's the Utility Advisory Committee. The committee, as we presented to City Council, will act as an official advisory body on the utility capital improvement program planning as well as rates. The committee would annually or more review the capital improvement planning as it evolves and as it moves towards council approval. The committee would annually review the utility revenue requirements of the utility and recommend to the city and city council manager rate adjustments as necessary. Review utility resource plans for all the utilities. Review conservation plans and programs for the utilities. And it's not limited to that, but those were kind of the main functions that were discussed when the advisory committee was created. There's certainly nothing wrong with doing more than that, and you guys as a committee can discuss that as well. I think as these meetings evolve, and we'll talk about under item 4, some of the future goals and meetings and agenda topics, the goal that we're going to have as a group is, making recommendations, as this gentleman correctly stated, to mayor and council. So that will evolve over time, and those recommendations will evolve over time. So that's pretty much all I had for item number 2, unless anybody has anything else.
If I understand correctly, the committee rules were rewritten within the last year. And so we have the general aspect of the ordinance, if I'm make sure I'm saying it right, which created the committee, but then we have general committee rules. And I was assuming that was what the business rules, or part of the business rules, were.
I think there are some business rules that have been created. I think they're still in draft form. As soon as we get those kind of finalized, because they're not looking at them just for this committee, they're looking at them for everybody. So once that gets completed, which I think will be relatively soon, we would bring those back.
Okay. Yeah, I saw that there was an attachment, and I couldn't find an attachment anywhere.
Yeah, that's because we found out after the fact that it was drafted and we didn't have it yet. So they should be coming forth within the next meeting or 2.
And then, because I'm not sure in the email, so if I missed something, I apologize, that we received, I don't think there was the full list that you stated, so of what is expected of the committee. There were some different aspects, but I also suppose that it'll be in the minutes from what you stated.
Yes, and it was in the presentation that was provided when the committee was created.
I see.
So we can certainly get that out to all of you.
That would be helpful. Yeah. Thank you.
All right. Now we're on to item number 3. I'm not supposed to be running the show, Larry.
Well, yeah, please go to item number 3.
I had a question on that PowerPoint you're going to be talking about. Will you entertain questions as you're going through it, or would you rather wait?
It's at your pleasure.
Okay.
Either one. Can't guarantee I can answer them all, but.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful if we could answer them as we go instead of forgetting at the end.
That's probably. And Kelly, oops. Not working. Hello. Can you hear me? See if it works. There it is. So what I really want to do today is just give you an introduction to the utilities. This is similar to a presentation I gave to council earlier this year. So some of you may have seen it. I apologize if you have to see it twice, but I figure it can't hurt. So we'll go over I call the waste management a utility. I don't know that it really is a utility, but the water utility, the wastewater utility, the electric utility, and the waste management portion of what utility services manages. I do want to state for the record that it is a not-for-profit. As a municipal corporation, we are a not-for-profit.
I had a quick question on that issue, because what defines for-profit? Because my understanding is money's been taken out of the utilities for other purposes. So what would that mean to be for-profit?
I would assume it would mean being similar to an investor-owned utility, where there's profit being shared between shareholders. So in the case of municipal utility, it's either paying for administrative functions that are provided by the general fund, where those funds are available, or it's going to capital, is pretty much where that revenue goes, or if we have to increase, operating expense budgets. What I do?
Well, if I can state too, I think that's one of the things that I think will help with this committee also. So one of the terms too is to go with is at cost. So it's basically what you said, but it's that is totally different than another utility, and it's important to our role and our understanding here is that things are for at cost as much as for nonprofit.
Yeah, and typically, for most public, when I say public municipal utilities, I shouldn't say public utilities, it is typically based on cost of service. And just real quickly, a big difference for Boulder City is a lot of capital projects are covered by the rate base. So in a lot of cases, utilities borrow money, which has happened in the past in Boulder City, but right now there is only one outstanding debt issuance, and that's on the raw water line.
And hopefully we can talk about this more in the future, but I guess when I consider at cost, also reserves would be an at cost.
Correct.
Aspect. Thank you.
This is a little bit hard to see, but the utilities is just kind of an org chart showing electric, water and wastewater, the landfill, staff. There's not really any staff for landfill. We have to manage some of the environmental issues related to that. Obviously, we have to manage the contract for the landfill. With regards to water and wastewater and the electrical group, we have a superintendent over each. We do have a vacancy right now in electric for an engineer. And then we have a utility business analyst that we hope to be filling within the next few weeks, which will help greatly with this committee because they're going to be doing a lot of work gathering information for this committee. So that's kind of how the organization's laid out. Strategic plan goals, like a lot of other utilities, we want to strive for prudent financial stewardship. Obviously, we want to invest in infrastructure, especially as our infrastructure ages. We want to manage growth and development, which is not too hard to do here because we don't have a whole lot of that, so that simplifies that. Obviously, promoting historic preservation is important to mayor and council and to this community. And then, of course, sustaining a high level of public safety services, which utilities weigh in on that with regards to environmental safety and public safety and public health. Just real quick, and a lot of this, again, I know you guys have seen, but the Boulder City Water Utility, it's regulated by the EPA 1974 Safe Drinking Water Act. Nevada Department of Environmental Protection has primacy, so we report to them. They regulate us. The water utility is a separate enterprise fund. You can see there the number of residential accounts and commercial accounts, but for the most part, it's residential. Operating budget's about $6.4 million. And then, of course, we're a member agency of SNWA. SNWA, just real quick, is a joint power authority that was created back in 1991. We are one of the purveyor member agencies shown there with the rest: Henderson, North Las Vegas, Big Bend Water District, Clark County Water Reclamation District, Las Vegas Valley Water District, and us, Boulder City. And you may ask the question, why is Clark County Water Reclamation District? Well, they're putting return flow credits in the lake, so that's part of the reason they're a member. SNWA provides Boulder City with wholesale raw water from the River Mountain Water Treatment Plant in Henderson, and then we get our treated water from Alfred Meredith Smith on the lakeside. They do quite a bit of work for us as well. They provide our water quality testing, so we don't have to do that in-house. They have a certified high-quality lab at the River Mountains Water Treatment Plant, and they do our testing. Obviously, they manage our water resources. I think a lot of you were here when John Ensminger, the general manager, made a presentation at a council meeting or two ago. A big part of their program now is obviously conservation and the drought contingency plan. They are focusing even more than they have been recently on conservation, and that will continue just because of what's going on with Colorado River. And then they operate and manage the regional water system. So everybody knows about the third intake. That's the latest project. That intake is completed. Now working on the pump station to complete that pump station. And that will complete a lot of the major work that the Water Authority has done to date.
Do we have any debt associated with the third? Does Boulder City have any debt associated with the third straw, or is it just increasing the cost of the?
It's just increasing the cost. So we do pay a portion of their drought surcharge and their infrastructure surcharge. That's the portion that we'll be talking about when we talk about rates. That's right now is embedded into your base rate.
Okay, that's right.
Which makes that base rate look higher. The other agencies on their bill, it's called out separately. And so when we get into discussion on rates, we can talk about that further. But yeah, those costs are embedded in there for those projects.
Thank you.
This just gives you an idea of how much water we use on an annual basis. It typically stays about the same. It's around the 10,000 acre feet mark for, or around the 7,000 acre feet for potable, around the 3,000 acre feet demands for raw, totaling about 10,000 acre feet. Clearly, conservation's been working, and we don't add a lot of population, obviously, so we're not really selling more water, we're selling less.
What's our total allocation out of the lake?
I can't remember the number offhand. I'll show you some of the capacities coming up. I just don't remember the allocation number.
The number I was quoted was 15,000. So there are two water rights. There's a senior water right from third in line, and then SNWA. I can show you the
I'm pretty sure it's in that stack of stuff sitting on there. But we can certainly get that. And again, we delve into the water issues, we'll cover more of that. Just a little bit about the assets on the water system side, and this is for the potable. Well, we do have about 780,000 feet of potable water mains. You can see the diameters there. Small diameter mostly, but we do have some larger 18 and 24 inch. We're fortunate in that the water pumps all the way up, the Water Authority pumps all the way up the hill, so we don't have pump stations. We do have a lot of PRVs for pressure reducing, but that does relieve a lot of our risk related to having to be concerned about pump station outages and those sort of things. We just have to worry about theirs. You can see the fire hydrants, valves, meters, everything that we have to maintain and operate. Pictures are always good. As far as the reservoirs, we do have the Black Mountain 5 million gallon. We have the 10.5 5 million gallon, the West Tank, and the Hemingway. So that's something we'll be looking at, is the amount of storage in the potable system. Because we are limited with one lateral from SNWA, that's something that I feel we need to look at. Do we have sufficient storage? Or do we have any concerns about losing that single lateral? How do we manage that on a peak day in the summer? So that's something we'll be talking about. You can see here, the good news, not real close to that pumping capacity, unless we added a very large customer, we wouldn't be getting close to the max pumping capacity of the SNWA lateral for quite some time. And if we choose to switch the Boulder City Municipal Golf Course to raw water, which is something we're looking at, that would even provide some additional capacity on the potable side.
I had a question on that one, because it seems to go up in steps.
Yeah, that was, I don't have a good answer for you there. That was some long-range planning that somebody did some bit of time ago.
And I had one more comment. In these graphs, it would be useful to know what the uncertainties are, because you have a sort of number, but how sure are you, of that number? Is it plus or minus,
As far, when you say as sure as,
Well, when you have a blue line there on that graph.
yeah, no, I don't know what's going on with me.
But it doesn't have,
Oh, there it is.
yeah. It's useful to know how confident you are, the true number, that in the future, the true number will actually fall. How close will it fall to that line? It won't be on that line, obviously. It'll be something different. So when you
And are you talking about the orange line, or whatever color that is, as far as the max?
well, both of them, actually.
Both of them.
You're sort of
Well, we
predicting.
certainly have a good handle on today, so fairly accurate
Right.
with regards to that. As we, like I said, the last time a water resource plan was done was quite some time ago. I don't think at that time they anticipated some of the conservation measures.
Yeah.
So I would expect as we move forward with that planning, you'll see that line flatten out. We are adding a few residential homes every year, but it's being offset by conservation.
Question on that too, is the maximum daily water demand, is that the projected? I mean, that's basically what they're saying would be the maximum that would be expected or required of the city on a given day. And the capacity is, I guess, the ability of the city to meet that demand, apparently.
So, as far as the actual usages, we have a pretty good handle on those max day demands. And a max day demand typically lasts about a week.
Right.
And it's typically the last week in June, first week in July, somewhere. And it's been a weird year, so I don't know what it is this year, but, so it's really about a max week, and it looks like it's hovered around that 15 million gallon a day mark pretty consistently.
Okay.
So Dennis, just wanted to follow up on the comment that George made. Yeah, at the very least, if we don't know all of the details that went into that blue line, if we can at least see if it ties to something else that's part of the city's growth forecast with residential and commercial development, just some of the assumptions that went into creating that number.
Yeah, we can do that, and as we kind of hone in on each utility and get into some of those technical details, we'll provide that information. For the first time ever, we actually have a hydraulic model, a real one that we can actually use, which certainly makes it easier for our guys when we have new projects or when we need to look at operational changes or operational efficiencies. So we now have that model in-house. On the potable side, we are currently going through the proposal process on the condition assessment work that we discussed earlier. We do need to focus on maintenance management. We're more reactive than we are proactive and preventative, so that's something we need to work towards. And hopefully we'll get some of that planning out of the condition assessment work. That's more formalized. On the, from an asset management perspective, we all know Boulder City's relatively old and the system is aging, and so obviously that's what we'll be taking a look at as we work through the condition assessment work. We do have the majority of the assets in GIS, so that's going to be helpful moving forward. We have pipe diameter, we have type of pipe, we have the age of the pipe for the most part, which is going to be very useful as we do the condition assessment work, at least as we start looking at replacement and programs or rehabilitation programs for pipes and valves and those sorts of things. Additionally, we haven't done a lot of performance measure type work, at least that I've been able to find since I've been here. So we are implementing performance measures, starting to track it, main breaks, service line leaks, those types of things, so we can get a handle on where there's hot spots in the system and we need to focus on maintenance or replacement.
Dennis, we didn't touch on the PowerPoint with the raw water system and assets. We skipped over it. We went to potable water, and then we went over to the water system planning, asset management planning. Is the possibility of the Boulder City Golf Course figured into the raw water system consumption?
Yes, so let me go back to that because I didn't even realize that. Or we're gonna get to it, one of the two. There's the potable, there's the raw. So yeah, let me hit on that real fast. I apologize for that, I buzzed right by it.
That's all right. I know it's our first night, so we're getting our feet wet. What I'm looking at, and George has alluded to it, is that right now on our potable system, we're burning through quite a significant amount of water. But if we switch the golf course over to the raw water system, isn't that going to drop our maximum daily water demand on our potable water?
You are correct, so.
By how many million gallons?
Probably during the summer, at least 1 million. It could be a little more than that, I don't have that exact number.
Per month, per day?
Per day.
Okay.
So, yeah, that'll free up, a significant amount just putting the municipal course on there. I suspect it might be a little more than 1 million a day. Just the way that golf course is designed and the way it's laid out. The caveat I would give there is a capital plan to replace that irrigation system on that course because it's ancient. So that'll make it more efficient. At the same time, we put the raw water on there, so they'll probably be using less.
And to the best of my knowledge, the replacement of the golf course water system has been already approved. It was in the.
It is in the capital improvement plan,
okay.
Correct.
And then are we metering the raw water system? And if we're not, why not?
Yes, we are meeting the raw water system.
Because I've seen no meters in the raw water system bullet points.
Yeah, there's not a whole lot. I mean, we have the meters to the Cascada Golf Course, the meters to the Boulder Creek, and then we do have some meters along the landscape irrigation. I just didn't put the number in there. It's probably less than 50 total.
Well, what I'm looking at is a way to recoup some of our costs for our raw water system. In other words, if we're metering it, we can bill it.
So it is all being metered.
Okay, thank you.
The only caveat I give there is we have found some along Georgia that were coded as potable, but they're small median landscape irrigation, so we're cleaning that up. It's not a significant amount of water, but it was raw water being charged as potable.
Okay.
So.
Question on that too, is the transmission line, the raw water transmission line in close proximity to the municipal course?
It's right next to it.
Is it, so it'd be a simple matter, no transmission extensions, just basically tap it?
The preliminary hydraulics that we just completed indicate that there should be no adverse impact to the raw water system if we make that connection. So when Public Works starts the design of the golf course irrigation system, we'll be coordinating on the best places to make those connections. Because there's a lot of grade change along that, and there'll probably be, I'm just guessing, there'll probably be 2 different connections that'll be metered separately, and it all come down to how they design the irrigation system. But good news is we don't have to provide any storage on the golf course if we choose not to, because we have plenty of pressure to make the irrigation system work without it. So, but that's still something we will look at those options. Sometimes it's good to have storage available. So,
that's great. Good.
Dennis, what's the difference? What's the cost of the raw water versus potable?
It's about 2/3. I'd have to get the exact number, and we'll share that with you when we start talking about rates. But it's about 2/3. So there will be a return on that investment of making that conversion. Again, it won't be as big as it would have been with the inefficient irrigation system because we'll be putting a newer one in, but it'll certainly save money in the long term for Parks and Recreation for the golf course.
So has that decision already been made, and what's the timeline for execution?
So they will start on the design of the golf course irrigation system this fiscal year, so soon. We just completed the preliminary work to show that, technically, hydraulically, it works within the last 2 weeks. So we just need to finish up that work, but we'll be able to start that coordination and get that design moving forward. I don't have a schedule for completion on the golf course.
Question on the municipal course again. the consumption of the water that they use, is it billed at a rate, or is it at a wholesale rate, or at no rate at all, or?
It's, as far as I know, and that's a good question, I'll have to check into that, it's billed at the commercial rate.
At the commercial rate, okay.
There, in addition to the raw water line that the city of Boulder City had SNWA construct and borrowed the money for, which is part of that debt service component, there is quite a bit of raw water line in the distribution system, and we'll be sharing those maps with you. And so it's a fairly significant system, and it does provide a lot of the median landscaping, as well as the golf courses, and then, like I said, Cascada as well. So it's not a small amount of water by any means.
Question on that, I just noticed as I was driving back and forth to Las Vegas that they recently, I guess, completed a tap into that raw water line to provide water into the El Dorado Valley.
So no, they actually tapped into the potable.
Oh, it's into the potable?
Yeah.
I thought it was into raw water. Okay.
Yeah, no,
I thought the sign said something about raw water, so.
It says El Dorado or solar water
Okay.
line, but
All
they
right.
actually made the tap into the potable.
Okay.
Reason being is because when they ran that original line down there, it's potable as well. So for redundancy and reliability purposes, they made it into potable.
Okay, good.
Oops.
Dennis, what do we have in play to prevent a cross-connect?
We have a cross-connection control program, so we're fortunate in that we're not doing a lot of connection type work here where we don't have a lot of growth. But there are parameters we can watch on the potable side that would give us indications that there was a cross-connection, but the cross-connection control program that we have in place is the program that would, in theory, eliminate that.
You made a comment about down on Georgia that some of them were being billed as potable and they're non-potable.
Yes.
So I was making certain that we had a way to prevent cross-connect because we had that episode happen where I used to live, and it was a very nasty thing to clean up.
Yeah, that's never fun for utility directors. And I would agree with you wholeheartedly.
Are we using a specific color pipe for raw water versus potable water?
I believe they used purple pipe.
Thank you. That was the key I wanted to hear.
What I don't know for certain, and I'm not sure, we'd have to verify how the valves were marked.
Yeah, the other thing I know that with the radio read controls that Boulder City employees have on the irrigation controllers, you could also take and stagger your times of operation to where you wouldn't overstress the main raw water line.
Yeah.
Just don't water during the day.
Right, and as you know, golf courses, they like to do most of theirs at night, and we did put on the max demand over that 12-hour period when we modeled the Boulder municipal course for that very reason, to make sure it'd work under the worst case condition. But you're correct, if you spread that out, or if you have storage on site, you can manage it differently as well. We'll probably look to the irrigation design consultant for feedback on that as well.
Thank you.
Oops. Again, like I said, there is quite a bit of raw water line in the system. Obviously, it's not as complicated as the potable side, but it's fairly straightforward. That gives you a good idea. If we add 1 or 1.5 more MGD of demand onto the raw water system, we still have quite a bit left from a percentage of pumping capacity available. So there's no concern there about making that conversion and exceeding the pumping capacity. And actually, that 15 MGD that's shown there is actually a contractual capacity. If worse came to worse for whatever reason, the SNWA can actually pump more than that by a little bit. So we got into. So that pretty much completes at least a little bit of information I'm going to provide you tonight on the water side. So I thought I'd hop on to the wastewater side. Talk a little bit about that, some of the effort that's being done on that, and again, talk about the future plans. The wastewater utility, again, the Clean Water Act was legislated in 1972. That's when EPA started basically putting rules in place for how you had to treat point sources, which was primarily municipalities at the time. If a lot of you remember, there were rivers burning in Ohio about that same time, and that's pretty much what drove that legislation. Again, NDP has primacy here, so we deal with them with all our discharge permits. It's a separate utility, as we stated earlier, essentially the same number of counts, an operating budget of about $1 million. As far as assets go, we have a lot of sewer lines for a small city. We have everything from 4-inch to 18-inch down closer to the plant. We have 3 sewer lift stations on the lake side. As part of those, we do have individual force mains tied to those, so it's basically a daisy chain, one pump station pumping to the next and eventually pumping it over the hill towards the plant. We are doing some work we'll be doing some work on those lift stations soon, upgrading some of the SCADA system. And then, of course, we have manholes, which we do have some older manholes that are deteriorating and need some work as well. There's a picture of one. So I know everybody likes looking at pictures of manholes. So as far as the treatment plant goes, and I know a lot of you have been here for some of that discussion we've had on the plant. Right now, we have a plant that's permitted for 2 million gallons a day. We treat about 1.3 million gallons a day. The majority of that is treated to secondary level, which means it's treated to a quality good enough to discharge it into the desert, and it disappears, evaporates, or it goes down into the ground. We do have currently have one effluent customer, which is the quarry. They use about 300 acre feet a year, so they don't use a whole lot. So the majority of that water is being discharged into the desert. And of course, the good news is we haven't had any permit violations with regard to our discharge permit.
I know for a while we were getting a lot of heat from the county over our discharge into the that area down there now, whatever they call it. Are they kind of backed away from that, or we still have issues with that?
I've heard that. I haven't actually seen anything in writing of what they were concerned about. I actually went down and looked at that, where it goes underneath I-11 and discharges into those channels. You know, it's essentially just vegetative growth that plant and animal life like right now. Probably the biggest issue with it. There's a picture of the plant. If you guys ever want to go down there, let me know. It's pretty exciting. I'm going to go back to, since we're talking about the effluent, I'm going to skip forward a little bit and then we'll go back. But we have been talking to SNWA about other options for what could be done with that effluent. Clearly, it's a resource that's not being returned to the river or the lake, and so there's no value with regard to the return flow credit, and it's a resource that's not being reused. So we're looking at, in conjunction with SNWA, can we get it back over the hill and discharge it back into Lake Mead? And that could be done in a number of different ways. Can we treat it and return it to the river, which would require some significant infrastructure, both on the treatment side and on the disposal side, because the pipeline to the river it's about 12 miles, I believe. And then you could look at indirect or direct potable reuse as an option. So we'll be looking at all those over the next 6 or so months. The SNWA is kind of leading that charge. They're obviously interested from a supply side perspective and managing water resources. So stay tuned on that one.
I would think that that would be a pretty valuable resource if we could structure it right, get somebody that's looking for water in the desert like it is, that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's pretty good water for what they would do. I think that would be an opportunity for some investment in the city and maybe jobs or things like that.
Sure, and the kind of way I look at it, if they're paying $3 a square foot to remove turf, then it has value. So, anyway, so let me go back. The sewer system itself is fairly straightforward, but we're probably at the point in time where it would be a good idea to have at least a backbone sewer model. It doesn't have to be every single pipe in the city. We're just not big enough to require that, but something that would be good enough for our technical folks to have a good handle on the sanitary sewer basins, how they're being impacted, how the lift stations are being impacted by adding homes or commercial development. So that's something we're looking towards. I mentioned here, talk about a master plan. I think really what I was referring to there is what do we do with the effluent? We really don't grow enough to really need a master plan itself, other than, the replacement rehab CIP program. We're not growing like Henderson. We don't intend to grow like Henderson. And so that master planning effort, when you talk about what people typically think about master planning, we don't really need that, but we do need the condition assessment work done. And I believe we do need the model and then the plan for the effluent.
Dennis, you mentioned secondary treated effluent discharged into the desert. What is the trigger for the next step of treatment we have to add to our plant?
Right now, there isn't one. So if we keep doing what we're doing, there's no trigger. If we decide to, say we decide to pump the raw wastewater up, convey it through Henderson's system, Henderson treats it, and that goes to the lake, then you got to treat to tertiary level and you got to remove nutrients. So it is a significant capital requirement. If we were doing the option of piping it to Lake Mead from down the hill, we would have to basically build a new plant, which would be a mechanical plant. It would have biological nutrient removal. Would NDP, would it be different because the water quality standards downstream are different than they are in Lake Mead? We'd have to look at that, but I suspect they would treat us very much like City of Henderson and others.
The other question that comes to mind is I know that Henderson does not have the capacity on their sewage treatment at this end of town to handle what we would inject into their system. So is there a point of interconnect that we would pick up if it was decided to pump it back into the lake for credits?
So the Water Authority is looking at that. So probably how that would be handled is we would maintain a pond or two down at the plant that would act as an equalization basin, so we could pump the same volume continuously 24 hours a day to minimize the impact of that, or pump the peak at nighttime up there. So that's options they would look at. Again, there would be costs associated with all that.
Okay, so, thank you.
And just real quick, a study was done for Boulder City in about 2009 where it looked at some options, not necessarily these options. It was looking at more of reusing the effluent, and the recommendation at that study at the time was basically don't do any, just keep doing what you're doing.
So Dennis, in addition to the options of potentially having more capital investment to be able to treat the effluent, is there an angle where we could also find some entity, a consultant of sorts, that could help us identify potential third parties that might see value in it, and then they can propose what they would do with that water?
Probably the best answer to that is that would require us to coordinate with SNWA. Just because they're the one that manages the resources. That doesn't mean we're in charge of who we would sell that to, but depending on what that looked like, So if it was some sort of exchange that required agreements with SNWA and a third party or something, I don't know exactly what it would look like, because it kind of depends on where that water would get used, right? If it's right here in Boulder City, that's one thing. If it's not here in Boulder City, that's something different.
Yeah, I was just thinking from an angle of potentially we go out to the market and try to find interested parties that can tell us what they would do with it, and then make some kind of a value proposition from that.
Yeah, it's typically we don't see a lot of activity on the market, at least for that level of effluent, the level that it's treated to. Outside the construction on the solar projects, they do use it as construction water. The quarry uses it. There's been a couple of folks looking at constructing some quarries near where the one we use. Obviously, they would have some interest in it. Yeah, it's a good question. I'm not sure what the right answer is. But.
Yeah, appreciate the input.
Did you say what it used to be about 1 million gallons a day? Is that still about right, or is it?
Oh, it's about 1.3 is what we're treating, and the quarry's using about 300,000 gallons a day of that.
There's 1 million GPD available for somebody.
Yeah. So there's about 1 million available. Obviously, we would get revenue for the effluent that we send to the quarry, and we're obviously interested in customers. There's just not a lot out there.
Yeah, it's just a matter of the economical buck we get back, because if we have too much capital expended, it won't be economically feasible.
Correct.
So,
and what I'm thinking, the reason why I asked the way I did is, rather than spending the capital investment, just putting out some kind of a request for interest, and see what interest level we might have, because I do think your point earlier about if there's compensation for ripping out grass, there's definitely a lot of value to this asset.
Yeah.
Or some value to this asset, I should say.
And more than likely, the most interested party is SNWA. Because they're typically always looking for water. So, and, that preceded, that may be cheaper than starting to build a different project that they may be looking at to bring in different resources. So, it's going to come down to what it costs, what their needs are as well.
Yeah, I think most everybody probably aware, but I would imagine it's related to the overall 300,000 acre feet of water that Nevada gets. And so that's where you're right. It would be more meaningful to SNWA than almost anybody else. So if they can expand that 300 with this, then it has value to them.
Yeah, and to put it in perspective, there was a time, and I haven't looked at it lately, but there was a time where groundwater rights were being sold for anywhere from $2,000 an acre feet to $8,000 an acre feet. So that means that water has value. Obviously, it has different value because it's not necessarily drinkable, but if you put it back in the lake, you take it back out and you treat it twice, so it becomes certainly more useful.
Yes, I think probably all the bottom line is if somebody else is willing to pay for the capital to do everything, and it's worthwhile, then it's something to think about.
Right, exactly. And so I think that's where we'll start. They're going to take a real high level look at those alternatives, and I think they'll be able to get a good handle on it. Is it even worth pursuing? Probably sooner rather than later. And then the devil will be in some of those details, because not only will capital costs go up, but so will operating.
Yeah.
So I talked about this. It's very similar to water as far as the aging infrastructure systems, and it is older, but it is from what I can tell, just a short time I've been here, it's in decent shape. We have a lot of vitrified clay pipe. We have a lot of AC pipe. That stuff lasts a long time. So I don't see us in the future, tearing and ripping out a lot of sewer pipe. We may be slip lining it or in situ forming or doing some of that type of work, but it's certainly cheaper than replacing pipe. in the future. So that's the
I know-
good news.
I know a few years ago, there was a problem with that. You see the asbestos concrete pipe where the water came over the hill from the lift stations. It released a lot of the gas that actually was deteriorating and eating the pipe up. Has that pipe all been replaced now?
Don't know.
I think it was, but I was just
Certainly be something we look at. I do know we have one project for, and I don't know if it's that one. This one's more of a concern of its adjacency to a storm channel. And I don't know if that would be similar to this, but we can certainly dig into that and find out.
because it was kind of a unique problem. It was where the water humped up over the hill, basically, the pipe was not full, and so the gases that were giving there was a
Hydrogen sulfide.
Yeah,
sulfide
so
gas
if it was just discharging directly into a manhole with no type of
Right,
control over the velocity or how it was being
right.
put into the manhole, then it was generating a whole bunch of hydrogen sulfide and probably smelled bad, and that manhole probably was not in very good shape.
And the whole pipe was going to pop, but I think that they probably replaced most of that. I just
Yeah, it could be.
If there's any more of those problems out there, so.
It could be, and we can always, in this day and age, the slip lining and those types of construction methods that are cheaper than tearing out of the ground have come a long way, so that's what I would expect in the future, and a lot of manhole remediation. Here again, very similar to water. Most of the assets, or all the assets, as far as I know, are in the GIS system. We do need to develop more of a comprehensive inspection program, cleaning program, maintenance program. Most of the time, we're doing reactive maintenance, but when the crews get time, they do get out and clean lines and do some maintenance. It would be better to come up with some industry standards and try to meet those standards just to make sure we're extending the life of those assets as far as we can. Capturing some of the data is something we need to start working on. The good news is I haven't heard that we have sanitary sewer overflows often, and if, the majority is downhill towards the plant. The only concern I would have initially, just by observation, is, the potential for the lift stations and it running down the hill on the other side, down Hemingway.
Have our lines been TV'd?
Pardon me?
Have our lines been TV'd?
They have been TV'd. Whether they have all been TV'd over time, I doubt it.
And how long ago?
They just do it they do it more on a as needed. If they get a grease complaint, something like that. But there's no good, I don't have real data that says we've done X thousand feet per year as a maintenance program. Would like to get there, so that'll be part of this plan.
This might be for future purposes, but is there land, because I don't know how much land we have down in that area, but on the other side of the hill, would there be feasible to build a secondary plant, so you'd keep both instead of pumping the water uphill, we'd be able to pump water there, and then from that plant, you could possibly get it back to the lake? It would be more feasible.
You could, I think, that's a smaller capacity, so when you start, it's a good question. I don't know. When you start looking at smaller capacity plants like that, they're typically little nutrient removal package plants. They'd be small in nature, probably not a big footprint, but the majority of our flow is coming from this side.
I figured as much, but we do have quite a few houses over there, so something. And if you do have to build a plant, if we could keep two, it might be advantageous of building a big instead of building one big one.
Yeah, something we can look at. Certainly take an initial stab at it, see if it makes sense. We talked about the effluent reuse. So, I would like to think that by the end of the year, we'll have some information back from SNWA with regards to those options, and if there's one or two to dig deeper into, then we could, we'll have that conversation. Electric utility, I think everybody knows, or maybe everybody doesn't know, that our power is purchased through the Silver State Energy Association. We get Hoover Power as well as the Salt Lake integrated area projects, and then the rest is market purchases. Operating budget for the electric utility is about $9.3 million. You can see here just what we anticipate our power purchase to look at from a megawatt hour perspective. And I would say this, focus on the first 5 years because SSEA looks out typically about 5 years and those numbers are more accurate. And for the last 5 years, it's basically, kind of unknown, but they do project increases just because it's smart planning, but there's a possibility they could actually stay the same or go down 5 years from now, so.
Again, that goes back to my previous comment. It'd be useful to know uncertainties, like how sure are they of those numbers? Because, for the cost of electricity, anticipated cost of electricity.
So I would think that's mostly just from the forward markets, isn't it?
Yeah, so the first 5 years are fairly certain, and we can get that information because those contracts, they execute sooner rather than later. I kind of look at it like Southwest used to do, where they used to kind of do their fuel purchases out 4 or 5 years. I
come from the world of science where we like to put uncertainties on numbers, how accurately do we know? I think it's useful to try. I know it's difficult, but I think it's helpful to try and do that.
Yeah. When we go to the next item and talk about future meetings, we can have some more discussion on that because we could actually have SSEA come in and present some of how they do that better than I can. I think that would be helpful because I get those questions a lot. And I'm certainly not the expert on the power purchasing, but they are. Between the SSEA folks and the folks at the Colorado River Commission, I think they can come in and present to the committee and give you better detail.
Fair enough, yeah. But for example, BOR in their supply and demand study for the Colorado River, they made a prediction. They had a line like yours, but they also had uncertainties. They said it could be this big or it could be this low, and then you have some sense of what these numbers mean, But I'm not accusing you. I'm just
No, I wasn't taking it that way.
It'd be useful to know.
No, I think we can certainly, and we would talk about future meetings. That was one of my thoughts. Similar to having SNWA come in, if we want to have them come in for a meeting when we're talking about water resources, we could do that same thing with folks from the Colorado River Commission as well as SSEA. Oops, button happy. Electrical assets, that gives you an idea of overhead transmission, overhead distribution, as well as underground. By far it's the largest of our utilities as far as the most assets. High voltage substations, a lot of transformers on the distribution side. Again, about the same number of connections as water and sewer as far as customers go. And then that gives you an idea of how many steel power poles and wooden power poles we have. I think everybody knows that obviously it's just like water and sewer, that system is aging as well. And we do have some significant capital improvement program projects in the works and ongoing.
So Dennis, what entities have we talked to regarding our aging system that have been able to give us some context on what we can do to extend the life of those assets or anything like that?
So a study was done, Ned probably remembers this obviously better than I do, but a study was done, and all of a sudden I can't remember the name of the consultant at the time, but they did look at efficiencies in the substations and transformers and age of the system and recommended the improvements to the 69 kV as well as going from the 4 to 12 kV. And so all that stuff a lot of that is in the capital improvement plan. What we don't, so we've done, a lot of that work has been done. Once you get down to the distribution level, pole replacement, those type of programs, that's where we need a little more focus on. they basically replace them as they fall. So we don't have an active pole replacement program, and so we'll be looking towards that as part of the condition assessment work. So we have talked to NV Energy on some of what they do. We have a relationship with the Nevada Rural Electric Association, and so we've gotten some information on how they do their condition assessment work, and we're looking at maybe a mix of some of those activities that we can try to be a little more efficient with it. It uses some newer technology, and as we get through that condition assessment, we'll kind of work through that. Pretty much similar to the water and sewer, we just need to start capturing better data with the system, especially as we get it replaced. And we start building it into an asset management program so we can actually plan future replacements and try to avoid where it's run to failure. That's fine, you know, smaller assets you can do that with, but some of the bigger assets we want to plan out so that we avoid getting to where we are today with some of the larger assets in the system.
Have you noticed in the newer contracts, are we asking the contractors to supply us with digital data that matches our systems, that as-built, et cetera? So we can put it into the GIS system?
So, yes and no. So we get pretty good CAD as-built drawings on the water and sewer side. I'd have to check on the electrical because I'm not exactly sure. But as that data comes in, we do integrate it into the GIS system for the new work. Could it be better? You know, can we start attaching more data as far as, you know, where we have outages or specific area outages and that type of data and tracking and intelligence type data? No, that's something we need to focus on. As far as the monitoring and operation of the electrical system, you know, we have a supervisor control and data acquisition system, but it's passive. So we monitor the data, but anything that occurs, if we need to open or close a switch, we have to go out and physically do. We don't have an pneumatic, you know, we don't have any kind of, the system, it's just, we haven't got to that point yet. Would I like to see that in the future, sometime in the next 5 to 10 years? That'd be great. If they could pull it up on, if Marvis could pull it up on his laptop and see what's going on and flip a switch from his house, that would be a good place to be, but we're not there. So now Marvis has to go out there and deal with it. I know
a lot of the different contracts, sometimes you ask for instance, I'm not sure if we're using AutoCAD or not, but you ask for drawings to be done in AutoCAD or something that we can do. A lot of the beta, if I'm saying it right, but some of the data that is with a digital drawing, if we just scan them in later, you lose a lot of that, and it takes a lot of time to get it.
Yeah, and I think the challenge we have is we integrate the data into the GIS system pretty decently, but we don't really have an asset management system to integrate, other than maybe attach an O&M manual directly through a link, or we don't really have an asset management system that where the register's been set up so that you can actually put transformer data, you know, in a real detailed way, which would be nice. We're just not there.
Okay, it's just something that maybe if we can look, that might be something else to look to in the future, that if we can ask the company to help us there, that sometimes their resources are available that aren't too much to their expense. Sometimes it is, so it all depends.
Right, and if you have a pretty well laid out and planned out the maintenance management program, that you can spill the data directly into that program by, you know, requiring it into your project specifications. That's awfully nice to have.
That's
we're just not there.
If we can just start looking at that in the future, so let's do it sooner than later, it'd be great.
No, I very, very much agree. So last but not least is the landfill. It's a Class 1 municipal landfill. We are regulated by the Southern Nevada Health District. Of all of our regulators, that's who I've touched the most since I've been here. They're out there regularly. There is challenges they're not huge challenges, but it's windy up there, so the operator has to spend a lot of time chasing trash down, mostly plastic grocery bags, and so the health district does a lot of inspections. The good news is that landfill is large. We have an approved permit that gives us many, many, many years, 100 years basically to operate. With the expansion to 116 acres. And certainly when we get into that, we can share more details of that long-term contract, but it's certainly something we have to deal on a regular basis, but it's not as intense as the other utilities as far as staffing goes.
Dennis, has there been an RFI or an RFP let for the new fence around the landfill that Boulder City is going to be having to pay for?
There has not.
Has there been any drawings done?
I think the only drawings were done were some that showed a conceptual drawing with regards to the expansion, but I'd have to check on that.
There's a capital project on budget to put a new fence in around the landfill, compliments of Boulder City.
Yes.
I recommend that we increase the size of the corner posts and the fence on the transmission side of the predominant wind pattern. That's where they seem to get most of the trash blown up against.
Yeah, you are correct about that, because it's out there. Yeah, we can certainly take a look at that. One of the things we're going to be talking to the health district about in the next 6 months is what they think that timing and need for that fence is versus what we think it is. And of course, it depends on how we develop the cells within the landfill. We are going to take a look at that as well. There is an approved permit that kind of lays out the cell development within the current area that's being operated. We just want to take a look at it, see if there's options that are better than the way it's shown now. We're not saying it's bad, it's just take a fresh look at it.
Yeah, because I'm noticing a lot of the off-road vehicles and stuff are getting right up close to that fence on that side, and they're going to just tear holes in it. And then we do have a problem with the trash blow coming into town from that angle.
Yeah.
So I recommend that we really reinforce that side, and we'll take the leeward side, and we just...
Yeah, one of the challenges, just one of the current operational challenges is when we complete the current cell that's being utilized, we go up, and there's just more wind. So that's why I just want to take a fresh look and see if there's another way to manage that.
The one way in past experience I've had is K-rail, which is used on the highways, portable thing, and then we put fence on top of that, so it's movable in panels. And it worked very well at the landfill up there at in the San Fernando Valley. It worked very well. They were heavy enough they wouldn't blow over, but it would be your primary protection and fence line for anything that on your cell that you're filling up with stuff during the day, and you could move them. And they just are picked up with either a loader or a forklift. It isn't that big a deal, but we had them up 10 foot high, chain link fence on top of those K-rails, and it worked out really good. So that might be something to think about for portable fencing.
Okay, I appreciate that. So that pretty much completes what I had for today. Like I said, mostly introductory. As we move on to item 4, we can talk more about future agendas. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Anybody else have any comments? Okay, can I go back to item number 1 right quick? Does anybody have an objection to going back to item number 1? Okay, hearing none, I'm going. When I was reading through the package, I noticed that the chair and vice chair was only for the calendar year. So I'm assuming then our selection is through December 31st. Is that what we're understanding? Okay.
That's correct.
Yeah, so without the business rules, I couldn't confirm that. So.
Yes, no, that's correct. And
okay, so then it would be, so we're gonna, then this committee then is gonna go from forward as of January, from January, it'd be in a calendar year. Sorry, repeating myself, but calendar year instead of a fiscal year.
Correct.
Okay. So then, and I guess the other thing too, unless we are doing that in 4, I might have missed something again in the email, but the terms, did that start today with this meeting, or like in July? Or this is actually, we're in August almost. Or did it start in June?
I'd have to check with the clerk's office, but I suspect it started with your appointment on that night of that council meeting.
Okay, because that was another one that wasn't clear.
But we'll verify that, but I'm pretty sure that's the case.
Okay, I think it would be helpful if possible to extend it some, because that limits our 1 year, for some of us, the 1 year appointment.
Sherry, we can take a look at that.
So it'd be something if we could see. Okay, appreciate it. Okay, so I guess we're on item number 4, unless anybody has anything else to discuss.
And if you want me to chime in just a little bit, the ad hoc committee had asked me months ago what I thought future meetings should look like. And I gave them a draft document that just kind of laid it out, essentially by utility, looking at some various like power purchases and having those folks come in. And, you know, that's certainly something I can share with the committee. The other thought that I had is it would be good, I think, to get our rate consultant to come in and do a rate type discussion on rate making and get some feedback from the committee on rate philosophy at a certain meeting sooner rather than later. It doesn't have to be the next meeting, but I think we're gonna need to give them enough information and some recommendations that need to come from the committee to the council so that they can nail down the options they're going to be looking at. And so I think if we could bring them in, maybe not the next meeting, but the meeting after, and kind of focus on, you know, what the current rate structure is, what the opportunities and what we should take a look at moving forward, that would be handy for them as well as for the committee, I believe. So that's something else to think about.
So the consultant's already been hired?
No, that's why we couldn't do it at the next meeting, so.
Okay. Is the
The RFP, the proposals have just come in.
So they've been out and you've got a list of consultants?
Correct.
How many consultants?
We had 6 on the rate proposal, as far as the rate study proposals, and we got 4 on the condition assessment work for the infrastructure.
I guess since we're on that line, does anybody have any problem with me asking a few questions related to that? So I guess one of the first ones is so going into 4 also, it's a good lead-in, is it possible for the committee to receive the same information that will be supplied to the consultant? So if the consultants are out there, hopefully the information is ready, and it'd be nice to have before the next meeting so we can start reviewing that.
I guess which information, I'm going to make sure.
If the RFP is out, I guess maybe I'm confused.
Oh, if you want to see a copy of the RFP.
No,
certainly.
I guess the information that would be supplied to the consultant. Because I was hoping, I guess, since the consultants the RFP is out, that the information would be close to being ready.
And I guess I'd have to qualify what information you're regarding to. So when we go out, to give you an idea, so when we go out for professional services selection, we have to comply with NRS 338. So it's basically it's a qualified base selection. And so we send out in that proposal a basic scope of work, and they're provided to say, yeah, this is our project team, this is our qualification, these are all the utilities we've worked with in our experience. Here's what we think, here's what we think this should look like moving forward. And then you go through a selection process and select those consultants. So we don't provide a lot of data up front when we're going through the selection process. Typically, you go through the selection process, you make that selection based on their qualifications. And typically that can be close. There's a number of firms that can do the work, but you got to select one, and you go through a rating process and you select them. Once you select them, they typically provide, and I'll use the rate, well, it's for both. They'll provide the city with a significant data request list, and that's when poor Shannon has to start getting more busy than she already is and need 2 lives. So that's typically how that proceeds.
Well, I guess
So,
then
the first thing we'll have to do is go through the selection process, negotiate a contract, and take that to city council.
Okay. So I guess the question is that maybe if we can get it at the same time they do, if that would be feasible, then we'd also have the data before they came in, so we could have a chance to review it and have quite better questions.
So for sure, our intent is for the rate consultant to stay engaged with the committee through the process from beginning to end.
Okay.
So whether that's just a committee meeting or a special workshop or whatever, we'll figure that out. But I don't intend for them to come in, get the data, crunch a bunch of numbers, and 9 months later they come back, and that's the first time you as a committee get to see that information. It will be, provided to you along the way as they get draft work back.
Right, yeah, we're all trying to get our feet wet tonight.
Yeah.
We're all trying to get an understanding of what to expect, and I guess that's what.
Yeah, no, the way we developed that scope is that that was put out for those qualification-based selection proposals is that they would participate regularly. I mean, not every meeting, but as they start producing results, they would come back through staff and to the committee with presentations.
Okay, well, I guess the RFP would be handy if that's not an unreasonable request.
No, we can get you the RFP.
So Dennis, you're gonna have regularly scheduled workshops and so forth where they'll present the committee. Whoever's gonna be presented the data, they're gonna be a workshop with a schedule and titles of what they're gonna do, so that would be what we're gonna participate in, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah.
So
So it could be just a regular part of one of these meetings, or if we felt like we needed to schedule a workshop or something separate from that. At some point in time, we're going, and that's going to be later rather than sooner, but at some point in time, we're going to want to start, if we really start getting results as to what a potential rate adjustment would look like, obviously we want to start sharing that larger than even the committee, and that might be a public workshop forum, something like that.
Dennis, on the 4 consultants for the condition assessment, do you know if it's more of a practitioner versus a consultant? Do you know if Osmose, OSMOSE, was included?
So for the first go-round, because I don't know, are they just electrical?
They're mostly electrical.
Okay, yeah. So they didn't submit, but we started out with just water and sewer because we're gonna attempt to do some of the electrical condition assessment work in-house. Okay. And then deploy some technology type activities and just pilot that initially. And if that deems to be successful, because it would be a lot cheaper, then that's the route we'll go. So once we have a little more information on that, we'll share it with the committee. My hope is, just because, I was trying not to be greedy during the budget process, but if we really did a detailed condition assessment on the electrical side, it would cost a lot more than what we have. So we're trying to be creative and use some technology to drive that assessment work.
Yeah, some of these practitioners can show an ROI, that they have pretty developed formulas and experience where they can show that based on the age of the infrastructure, you can expect this kind of replacement activity or rejuvenation activity with some other kinds of entity. So I'm curious about the balance between talking to consultants, even on the water side of the portfolio, versus practitioners that actually have the ones that are doing the work, so to speak, that have all of that experience.
So I will tell you, at least for the water and sewer, and we have, they just came in, so they are typically consultants that have a history of condition assessment work, and they will bring in specialized staff depending on the utility that they're looking at and the type of infrastructure. So, they'll have different staff. It may be somebody they employ that's typically a contractor, but they're looking at some structural type work in a reservoir that maybe the consultant doesn't have specific experience with. So they do that type of activities and embed that type of work in the scopes.
Okay.
It really just depends. In the case of water and sewer, a PRV replacement program's pretty easy to develop over time. Like you said, that would be something that's manageable and that you can program over a long period of time, and it would make sense that you're not having PRV failures on a regular basis because you're replacing those parts and pieces on a regular basis, and that would be more preventative. But pipelines, those are a little different beasts.
Sure.
Like cable and conduit, because sometimes they last 70 years and sometimes they last 90, and you just don't know. And then you start looking at, so in that regards, they start looking at risk and whether it makes sense to run it to failure. If it's something that can be replaced quickly, then maybe you let it run to failure because you can get another 10 years out of it. And that is the kind of assessment they look. They look at the risk and the consequence of failure, and they do those analysis. And then that's where they kind of develop their replacement or rehab programs.
Sounds good. So, to be continued.
Yes. Stay tuned. So I didn't know. So I'll just lay out what I sent to the ad hoc committee. Meeting number 1 was this. Meeting number 2 was, and I did it this way on purpose. Obviously, you have the right to change it. There was a lot of energy around rates and specifically the basic service charge for water. So I thought, well, we might as well start out with having a discussion on the water utility and have some of that discussion on what that looks like as far as the conservation program, more details on conservation. We could certainly have the Water Authority present if we wanted to. These are all at your wishes. Talk about water quality, and then again review the operating plan as well as the operating budget and improvement plan. Get into more detail on the demands of both the potable and raw water system. So that would take at least 1 meeting, maybe 2. Because I'm trying to keep these at a reasonable time, but that's going to be up to you guys. I said an hour and a half because right now we're at an hour and a half. And number 3, I kind of reserved for wastewater, the meeting number 3, or it could be meeting number 4. We can certainly work on that as we go. And then moving on to electric, that's where we would maybe have SSEA come in and do some presentations and get into the both talking about the demand side as well as the integrated resource plan, as well as our supply pipe side power purchases. And then last but not least would be probably a shorter meeting on the landfill. And that's kind of how I see it laying out. Now, my experience tells me that, as you learn as you go, and sometimes that changes, and that's perfectly fine. That's your role as the committee to decide, maybe you want to hear something different sooner, or we find some information that says, hey, we want to move this up in the agenda or put it to the end of the meeting agenda. But that's essentially how I laid that out.
Well, I think the first thing we want to do is I think those are very good topics, and I think that's something we want to shoot for. My thought would be is that we would try to, if everybody's in agreement, so we want to work in parallel. So we need to get a certain amount of training, a certain amount of understanding up here in the committee ourselves, but I think we want to be able to start reviewing some aspects of the city also. So I think that's where it's a little difficult tonight, but I think we have Fred pointed out some really good ideas. I think a lot of his stuff can be pointed out. I'm sure the committee has ideas, and so we can figure out how to best go forward. So if we could do your ideas as a agenda item, but we would still need additional agenda items to move forward, then I guess we figure out which is the best order.
We can certainly take what we drafted up here. We can take what our community member gave us. We can kind of meld that into maybe a draft future agenda for consideration next time. And we can hit on one of these next time as well.
Okay.
But still try to keep it at I guess you, the committee, need to decide how long you want these to be, but I'd hate to take up advantage of the fact that you guys are volunteering, but we could go as long as you want or as short as you want.
Well, if we get agreements, I think we'd want to do a minimum of 2 hours, because we've got a big curve to do.
Yeah.
And we've got a lot to learn, and I think there looks like to be a lot to review. So I think going back to what the one big decision is everybody willing to do this on a monthly basis?
Larry, if I might, I was at the utility ad hoc committee meeting where those came out, and that involves 5 meetings. And
at a minimum, yeah.
Yeah.
I suspect it would be more than that. But
if we used our first 5 meetings, it would be 6 months before we really got down to business. And the council delayed the rate increase until January. And I feel like we should be up to speed in discussing the rate study way before that so that we can make a recommendation. I would like to suggest that maybe we have 1 or 2 work sessions, maybe a half a day on a Saturday or something like that, to get through some of this so that we become effective before January.
I second.
Yeah, I agree.
I'm not excited about Saturdays.
Yeah, I think if we could, it might be better doing it during the week. But I think what you're just saying is as long as it's just something other than the regular meeting, and if we can get something that meets with everything. So if I was on time, but I guess I was late compared to the rest of the committee, so I didn't know if people introduced themselves more or not. I know most of the people on the committee, but not everyone. I've got the assumption you're still working.
Yes.
And Howard, are you still? Okay, I think the rest of us, well, and you're a professor, the rest of us are retired, so there's 4 and 3, so we would have to come up with a time that would work for the workshops. And so I don't know if we want to try to do that tonight, or we can just come back. But first off, is monthly okay with everybody? Can we agree on monthly? Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so basically a first. Do we need to get an approval for this, or do we have to get a first and a second?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if we agree on that, I agree wholeheartedly with you, Eileen, in that we want to, if nothing else, we need to do it parallel. If that's the worst case scenario, and it's parallel, but the best case would be is trying to get a better understanding, because I was looking at that option also, since we postponed it, but it's still not an issue. We have to look at, we have a lot to do in 6 months, or basically almost 5 months now. So I think that's what, and I guess I'm still trying to figure out what can and can't be said that's not on the agenda. So how we move things forward if they're not on the agenda, so to try to escalate some of the aspects forward. So if we get today a little bit more, or we can say much more, we're just going to have to finish after the public comment, and then next week we can start saying here's the ideas of what we wanted to go forward with, but can expand on them.
If you would like, and you can certainly give staff, which would be me, direction, we can take what I've heard tonight, and we can craft that together as a longer plan for the meetings, as well as some embedded workshops in the next couple of months, and send that out for review, to try to at least formalize that and get an agenda prepared that we can post. If we're going to do a workshop, it's still open meeting law, and we still have to post that. So that's just, that becomes a little bit more effort on our part and how we manage that, because when we're running workshops and monthly meetings at the same time. So we'd have to put a little bit of thought on that on our end, but we can, given what I've heard tonight, I think we have enough to work with at a staff level to get something to the committee to provide us comments back and moving forward. But I do think from a regular agenda, as far a regular committee time and day and time, we probably should nail that down tonight if possible.
That, no, I agree with that.
Yeah. And then we can go from there. We can try to figure out the rest at a staff level and communicate via email on what those agendas would look like.
Since item 4 is talking about priorities, the only thing that I'm hearing for the next meeting, though, is water service charge rate. And so should we be talking more about other topics, too, that are priorities? Or is that sufficient by itself?
I believe we definitely need to talk then more. So we would have that as an item, and then we need to, I guess if I'm understanding correctly, staff would incorporate Fred's ideas, and then we would start prioritizing them. Is that would be an idea for next
Yeah,
next
I'd
time?
have to sit down with his work and what we were contemplating and see how that melded together, but I think there's something there that I think we can come up with, be solid enough to, certainly make sure we can cover in a 2-hour period to provide the committee with data they need to do to start formulating recommendations. Again, I think one of the big things we need to do as soon as we can, and it can't be too soon because we don't have a consultant on board yet, is that that rate consultant coming in and doing that presentation on rate making and options that could make sense based on feedback from the committee and feedback we've heard over many months since I've been here on different philosophies and different ways you can manage those structures themselves. And then, they could certainly give the committee some good feedback, which I think eventually could lead to some recommendations that could go to city council sooner than other things, just because I think that's more important.
Well, I think the discussion on the utility rates, just in general, would be good for next time, and then we can expand on that. But I think also, so the key thing is we've got time and day. So for those that are working, I'm assuming that 6 o'clock is probably the minimum that we would want to start. Is that what I'm
home by 4:30.
Yeah, 6 o'clock is about as early as I can do.
George?
I can do earlier than that, 4:30 or whatever.
But Kevin, you prefer not anything earlier than 6?
Yeah, 6.
So do we have, so if we would be going 6 to 8 with expansion on that, if we get longer topics, would that be, and there would be into that?
I think we have to for this first 4 or 5 months if
I-
we're going to get something done.
I appreciate that. That's the way I feel, and I think that's the way a lot of us feel. Is I think we're willing to. So it depends on how much that we realize, and I apologize for the staff's time on top of it. But I think the committee is willing to put in longer hours to try to get information.
We are at your service, whether we like it or not.
So I think if we put it down at 6 o'clock as a starting time, then I guess the next question is, do we try to set up a standard day and time of the week, or because it's going to be a little hard if people have already planned out 6 months in ahead for vacations and stuff like that. That's going to be what's a little hard is the exact time frame.
Preferentially, we would prefer a set, fourth Wednesday of the month or something like that, just because it just helps from a staff perspective, knowing that it's consistently on that day, on that month, at that time, it's a big deal for us.
Would it be easier for everybody if we pick next meeting's time and then have people look at their calendars and decide what might be more reliable from that time on?
Right, because we'll have to, remember, there's other advisory committees and commissions and planning commission and city council, and so we got to work around all those.
Of course.
I happen to like Wednesdays myself, but I'm a non-voting member, so.
I would suggest the 21st of August for the next one.
For the next meeting?
That's on a Wednesday.
That might be the same day as another commission, so we'll have to look at that.
I know I'll be out of town on the 28th, so,
I'll be out of town on the 21st.
okay.
How about the 14th?
Looks like that's it.
I'll be out of town on the 14th.
I doubt you're ever gonna all make every meeting, so,
Well, it depends, I guess, at this time too, maybe we don't do a Wednesday and we just pick a day that works. So are you out for a week or two, Dad?
On the 28th, I'm out on the 28th, I'm here for the 21st, I'm out for that week.
Okay, let's see, we're starting, well, I guess since the 28th, that would also, since we are at the end, it might be advantageous to do earlier in the month, but the 28th might work, because that would give you, the staff, more time too to organize it, so too early. Is that I think I can do the 28th, is that?
I'm gone that.
Oh, you're gone.
I'm gone that
28th.
day. 27th, I'm good.
Do we know, I guess, so 27th, is that open to everybody? That's a Tuesday, but.
It's probably council.
that's city council.
That's what I was thinking, probably.
What about the 29th?
I'm gone for that whole week.
You guys are looking at August?
Yes.
We're in, oh, okay, I got you.
The 29th is the last work day for staff. I think we ought to shoot for August 28th.
And just two.
And whoever is here, and who's not, they're absent.
We've got 6, if I got so far 6 people.
I vote for the 28th of August.
Yeah, and then, certainly whatever packages we put together, you'll still have those, so, even if you're not available for the meeting.
Okay, well, the 28th, then we'll shoot for, then you'll have a better idea of what days are better available for moving forward on a regular meeting basis? Yes.
Or, yeah, we can certainly take a look at that.
Okay, and you'd have some recommendations, and the committee would.
And I have some thought, given everything I've heard right now, I think I have a pretty good handle on what the next meeting should look like. So I'll draft that up and send it out. But I think it's going to be more focused on, probably budgets, capital plans, and rates. At least initially, and that'll at least bring everybody up to speed on why they are, well, we may not know why they are, but at least what they look like. And we can certainly show what the revenue has looked like as rates have changed over the last couple of years. And we can present that sort of data. And then once we do get the consultant on board, we'll have to bring them up to speed as well, at a staff level, and then they can come back, and I think that'd be the good timing for that follow-up discussion with the consultant in the room.
If I can ask then, if we're going to bring those questions forward, because I think that there's just a tad bit more detail needed than what we see in the city council package. So can I ask some specific questions now or some to be brought to the next meeting?
Yeah.
Because basically it would be helpful for me and hopefully for the rest of the committee would be the revenues for each utility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what I'm talking about. Right. So we would provide, going back probably a couple of years at least.
That would be great.
Maybe more than that, depending on how good the data is. We can show certainly what the projected revenues were versus what the actuals have been, to the extent that we have that information, which I'm pretty sure we do. And so, we'll collaborate obviously with the director of finance, and we can get that data put together and put out ahead of time as part of that presentation.
Well, what it is because there's about 2 or 3 components that's not been shown as much. So the revenue and expenditures have been broken out in different aspects, and those are pretty consistent. What's very confusing to me is the transfers in and out.
Yeah, we can bring the transfers in and out. We can have discussions on, what component of that is, planned for capital versus the operating side of it. Obviously, there's the debt component on the water side with the raw water line, and so that information we can certainly show graphically, I believe, in most cases, so everybody can visualize it and see what it looks like.
And the last components are the reserves. I've seen some in some documents, but I don't know if I've followed it through in all the utilities, because I believe we're getting close to filling those, for lack of a better term to say that.
So there's reserve policies that have been set by the city council, so we can provide that data on what those reserve policies are, as well as what the actual fund balances are, reserve balances. That, I think we can get that easily by the 28th.
And then the last component is, I believe I'm using the proper terminology that the city uses, is the restricted and unrestricted funds. So as an example, just nice round numbers, if I've been following it correctly, the electrical utility starts in about $34 million at the beginning of the year, and then ends anywhere from 35 to 37, depending on, and usually because there's been more. So I would assume that the 34 would include 34 million as your restricted and unrestricted funds. And so that might be a little bit to ask, but understanding what's restricted and unrestricted, then you understand what money would be available for the rate process to aid in the revenue process and the reserves.
And I think a lot of an important piece of this is obviously the capital part, because it's all tied together into the rate structure. And because Boulder City is a pay-go utility, you can't spend that money on the infrastructure until you have it. So in that case, you start to see as the rate increases took place, the fund balances started to build in order to build the revenue necessarily to construct those capital projects. So we can show that what's intended to go for operating, what's intended to go, because we know what operating is, and then again the reserves. So I can work with the finance director on that presentation directly.
Yeah, because what I'm trying to understand is we are not starting off with a zero budget. We're starting off with 34 million. And if we collect,
we certainly have a fund balance at the end of each year, and that typically, we budget operating, is operating, but that fund balance is certainly changing over time.
Correct,
and I guess it changes over time. As an example, one of the next projects on the electrical side is an $8 million project, so that'll change as that project gets constructed, then that fund balance will change significantly.
Exactly, but by understanding the restricted and unrestricted, then you know what could offset that. And so you already have some money already. You don't have to collect more for that $8 million. You might have some already in the funds.
Yep. And so, that's certainly a part of the math the rate consultant will be in analysis that they will be looking at.
Exactly. So I'm asking it early, but it's part of the funds that's what I'm saying.
It's the same information we'll have to get to them.
Right. So if we have it next week. Next week. Yeah, thanks. Next meeting, then it would be a good start to break down the budgeting aspect of it. But having the last several years, maybe even when the rate started, which would be back all the way to 16 or 17.
Yeah, we started generating the revenue, I think, in 17.
Correct. That's my understanding.
So that's, you've had a couple of years to show what the changes as the rates modified or changed over that time. So we'll be able to see all that.
So, I think the water, I believe there's been a lot of discussion about the base rate. So I don't know if we can do something as early as next month to start that discussion, but understanding what some of the things might that could be done in a discussion on that.
You know, we certainly at a staff level, we have the experience to provide some information on various rate structures that the rate consultant could look at. And then when they come in, we could have that discussion again. I think that would be a good refresher. In a lot of cases on the water service charge, there's a minimum amount of volume that's included in the basic service charge. We don't have that here. And then, of course, the revenue has to come from one or the other. It's either from the basic service charge or it's from the commodity charge. So, you know, depending on what you do to one is going to have some sort of impact to the other. That could be positive from a conservation perspective if you modify the commodity rates.
Well, I think,
that when they start crunching the numbers, they'll get a better handle on that and give you some better feedback for sure. But initially, we can certainly talk about what those look like.
well, the one other aspect I believe we have is I believe there's some lease money that is possibly coming available that's not already been.
And so we will present that as well as part of that package. So we get a certain amount of revenue goes to the capital improvement fund, and then some of those do go towards utilities.
Because I believe right now we're looking at about $86 plus or minus for just the base charge, and I know that's when you look at utilities for everything.
For everything.
And I believe that's got a lot of people concerned. And so I think that's one thing I think we'd want to look at sooner than later. And so some things are just, as you said, they're going to have to come from one resource or another. Other ones might be able to be offset by the lease, which hasn't, to my knowledge, been fully researched in the past. So that's, and I guess.
Yeah, and I think again, that one, you know, at the end of the day, that one will be it'll be obviously a policy decision for city council, but I think they're going to look for recommendations from this committee. So
that's what
we'll certainly need to look at all of that.
But I think that leads to also that I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding properly. So how do we, in the open meeting, how do we discuss some of these issues? We're discussing it now, I suppose, but we're not really trying.
We're not taking action on anything,
right? But there's
and you're not really deliberating in anything.
Well, how do we deliberate then?
Well, then we'll have to get more specific on the agenda as regard to whether it's an action item and what the action item is intended to be.
Because
so that's not going to happen really soon because you're still getting information.
Of course.
I think that'll happen once we're ready to start talking about recommendations, then we'll have to get very refined on what the agenda is, certainly in order to comply with the open meeting law.
Well, theoretically, we would want to do some of that in November, possibly November, December, because it's coming up close. And then now we run into holidays in November and December, so we have some problematic issues there too.
It's going to be a challenge.
So, okay. So I guess the basic thing that I would ask if the committee members and staff could look at what would be feasible, what months might be feasible to double up on workshops or something like that. So I know we would not want to be doubling up in November or December.
Yeah. So we would be glad to, as staff, we can, we know the date of the next meeting. You've made that decision. We can look at some alternative dates and send them out and get feedback and give you an opportunity to look at your schedules.
Eileen, is there more additional on that? Did I cover that with your workshops and stuff, or was there stuff we double up on a couple months?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairperson, I have a couple questions. Number one, did we let a new contract out for our utility billing printing? And are they going to take and mess the billing up again by changing the format on it?
I have no idea.
Because Wells Fargo was printing our utility bills before and it went out to contract, and I heard a new contract was let. So I hope and pray that they're looking at the new contract and the new billing printout or sheet as to how it's going to be laid out.
Yeah,
and that's when we can break the water charges out at that point in time, to where we're showing more true cost instead of burying everything into a service charge. Because that's what the chairperson stated also, and I've heard that service charge for Boulder City is exorbitant based upon from people from fixed incomes. And we're trying to get a handle on it. If we can break it out, it's a reality that water, electricity, and sewer are commodities. okay? And the problem is we're trying to take and get those commodities to the consumers at the lowest possible cost. If we keep hiding stuff in the base charge and the service charge, you're gonna have a bunch of disgruntled people. And that's all we're trying to do in this committee is get it unscrambled to where we can talk to a layperson and explain to them why those charges are in there and what they're for and what's driving the charges and the cost. That so far, since I've been in this town, have never been explained. So that's why I'm saying I think there's a new printer coming online or on board to print our billing. And if so, I hope they're not going to change the format and scramble it all up, because right now it's a hard thing to read.
And I don't know the answer to your question. That would be handled by the Director of Finance, Department of Finance, but I can certainly get back to you on that.
And then the second thing, how many capital projects have had bids placed on them and they have not been followed through with? In other words, how much stuff have we pre-costed our money to? How many projects, and then all of a sudden it's an all hold. In other words, from the last fiscal year, not calendar, but fiscal year, we had projects on the books where contracts were awarded to different vendors and companies, and those contracts were never fulfilled. So do we have surplus money sitting around to be carried forward to this fiscal year? Or do we have contracts in play that there's been a flag on the contract to where we've held back on it? You mentioned one for $7 million. That piqued my interest because that's not what the original bid was for the 69 kV line coming down Nevada Way into Hemingway Valley.
No, that would be the next project.
Correct. So my problem is right now, because that was my forte many years ago, is we've got some serious deficiencies on our subtrans system, 69 kV and below, to where we can't even utilize our new 100 MVA transformer that was shipped in over a year ago, assembled, dressed, put on a pad. She's still sitting there. We don't have a way to get that amount of energy off of that transformer into our community, even from the Boulder City tap location to substation 3. And those are the things I'm looking at. We've got money that we've earmarked for projects. Projects haven't been started based upon the checks being cut by the finance director. I haven't seen the money go out in the right way, and there's just stuff going on that I'm not able to get answers to. And now on this committee, I'm hoping I can get answers to where people asking me questions can have questions answered.
Yeah, I think that's a key issue, is that the sooner we can share information, so we're going to get information for you, but we can also get information out to the citizens, for lack of a better word, then we can start showing what we're learning and what.
Sure.
So basically, communication, the best we can. So
Okay.
That's why we're definitely. I'm very happy to hear that we're all in agreement to work a little longer in the beginning here. I apologize to the staff for the longer amount, but it's going to take a lot of time. But the sooner we can get information back out to the citizens and to the city council, I think the better off we are. So we're going to have to work pretty hard to try to get some recommendations out sooner than later. And that's what we'll have to find out, I guess, 3 or 4 months, what we can start with, because I think we were looking at 2 reports per year, I believe was a recommended aspect to the city council.
Or more. I mean,
Or more,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
But even for 2, we're still looking at a short time frame. And if we want more, we definitely have to get something out. So I think I'm repeating myself, but then I definitely, if somebody else wants to say it, George.
I just said, so where does it say, I was going by the ordinance. I'm not against 2 reports per year, but where did that come up? Is that officially written somewhere?
I thought it was, but that's the reason I asked in the very beginning.
I'm not sure.
What is expected of us?
Because the ordinance says annually. Annually review the 5-year utility capital improvement plan. I'm not against multiple times, I'm just curious.
Okay, but I thought I read someplace where that it was part of it, that it was.
Oh, okay. All right.
Okay. But yeah, I think what's happened is that there's been a few things distributed, and I'm not sure anything's completely consistent. I don't know if there's one document that says what is expected from us, and that's the reason that I'm still a little confused myself. Okay, so I guess we're getting close to the 8 o'clock hour and we still have the comment period. Is there any more comments?
Just to clarify, it would be super useful for me to have the most up-to-date document that says what the ordinance states as to, with these 2 per year and that stuff, if anyone has that, that we can circulate it, because that's kind of the rules of the game to some extent. It's still in draft form.
Correct, but it hasn't been printed to where we've got it in our hands yet.
I guess that.
And that's what I was referring to earlier, so hopefully that is something that will be coming soon.
Okay.
But is the resolution, is that still part of it, or is the resolution finalized?
I don't know the answer to that.
Because I believe that, if, like you're stating, I think that was the resolution, that it was 2. So yeah, if we can get a copy of the resolution, that would be
Yeah, we
very
can
helpful.
certainly get a copy of the resolution, and then again, as those business rules get defined, then we'll get those out as well.
Okay, great.
So I have one quick comment, and it's just a big thank you to you, Dennis and Shannon. I think you've done a great job of helping us really hit the ground running. And this is, first impressions with you, Dennis, but I can tell that you have some exceptional experience. So looking forward to the collaboration that we'll be able to discuss as a committee, and appreciate your leadership on this.
We will all be learning together.
I want to double the thank you. I greatly appreciate you guys' time. So I guess before we go to the public comment, is there anything else or any other requests? We've already bombarded you quite a bit with anything else.
I believe we have sufficient information to.
Well, I'm sure you do. It's just what we understand.
Yeah, it's,
So I guess then the last part of the public, the last item is public comment. And so basically go back to the same that we had, rules that we had for the starting point of the comment period. Is there anybody in the, that would like to have a comment?
Again, for the record, Fred Volz. A couple of things. First of all, it seems imperative that in your next formal meeting or workshop, your focus is on the 10 people who have responded to the RFPs, the 6 for the rates and 4 for the condition assessments. Those people need to get started on their work just as soon as possible. And so to the extent that what they have submitted can be part of the meeting package for the public to review it, as well as you folks giving your best assessment of their work, they're still not going to be done by January 1st when the rate issue comes back up again of the increases, but at least they will be on their way as far as doing their work. And the rest of your work can flow afterwards as far as background information, statistics, etc. But they really need to get underway as soon as possible, and it's going to be a while before there's a decision made by the City Council who to choose, based hopefully on your recommendation and staff's. The other thing I'd like to add is that the open meeting law allows for 2 different ways of taking public comment. You can either do it at the beginning and end of the meeting, as you're doing tonight, or a more inclusive and more useful way to handle it is for each action item to call for public comment at that time, so that there's a proposal made, but before a vote is taken by the committee, the public comment is allowed, and that could have a bearing on that particular issue. It's hard for the public to comment on something if there's been no discussion by the committee in advance, and after the fact of the vote, it really doesn't matter. So that's why it's helpful to have the public comment before you've taken a vote on each action item, not on informational items. Thank you.
James Howard Adams. I just wanted to thank each and every one of you for being up here tonight. I think it's really great. It's been a long time coming, and just as a citizen here of Boulder City, having this committee means a whole lot, because it really, just seeing the breadth of knowledge that you guys have, and I'm really looking forward to being able to hear what you guys have to the advice that you guys have to offer, the input that you guys can provide. I think it's going to be an incredibly valuable asset to this community. So once again, thank you. Just a point for anybody, I'm new to this myself, but sometimes if you're speaking away from the microphone, it can be a little hard for some of us to hear out in the audience. So anytime you're speaking, if you can just kind of lean into that microphone, it's helpful. Thank you.
Kieran McManus, Mayor. I know often we're supposed to deny our titles here, but for this, I want to also mention how much appreciation I have for what all of you have done. I've worked with several of you on the ad hoc over the past many months. This is something that before City Council took quite a while to get done. I know it's going to take time out of your lives, so it's important for all the folks here in Boulder City, and I really appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Linda Barnett, wanted to thank everyone. I wanted to thank you tonight for stepping up, all of you, that you were the ones who said this is what we want, rather than just, hearing about what would be good. So I just thank each of you for having the courage and the strength to just go forward and say, this is what we're going to see and this is what we should do. Thank you.
Okay, so if anybody else has it, I want to thank everybody for your comments. And I guess the one comment, I guess Fred's comment was a good point. And does the committee have a suggestion? I'm thinking since we're starting, I'm not sure we want a comment period on every item now, but we could put one in the middle if that would help. So it would be one in the beginning, one in the middle, and one at the end. Is that feasible? Does the committee think that's feasible?
What's the normal? What's our council? How's their program set up? How do they have it set up?
City Council is currently set up at the beginning and at the end. Just from an experience standpoint, it does work both ways. Up until the point when the agenda's a lot of items, then that starts to get a little more difficult to manage. But either way has been done. I've seen them done both ways.
Can the comment periods be inserted prior to meetings because of the open meeting law? We can stick it in there as an agenda item if we think that it's going to bear fruit to have public comment in the middle of the meeting? In other words, I'm trying to say that we can be a little more flexible. We can start out with open comments, public comments in the beginning and the end, but if we've got something that we consider a hot button topic, can we insert a comment period in the middle of the meeting? If we're prior notification.
For that specific item, I would assume so, yes. If it was for a specific item, I'm pretty sure you could do that.
Well, would it have to be for a specific item, or if we've got 6 agenda items and we find that we've got one of the items that's a little, maybe you're saying the same thing. Number 2 becomes a hot topic, and we decide to put it in at that point where we wouldn't have put anything in till the end.
I would think, and I'm not an open meeting law expert, although I think I'm getting close. I would think at the beginning of the meeting, if there was a motion to add a public comment on a certain item that the committee made a motion, approved, and agreed to, that would be fine.
That's what we did. We had a comment out in so I think comment from the again.
Doesn't it work that for each agenda item, there's a time that the public can speak? Even if we've opened up with a comment, then comes item number 4, and, the mayor has said any comments at this point, it wouldn't be beginning, middle, end, it would be the agenda item itself. Any comments, any public comments at this point after you guys have, you guys and girls have discussed it? I think that's what Fred had said. It wouldn't be 3, it would be however many agenda items, and then there would be public comment after you discussed it?
Action items.
Action items.
You can turn into Kate.
The action items,
The key definer is the action items. So if you have an informational report from somebody, that's not really a public comment issue. It's just informational. You're not taking any action on it. But if you're actually voting to do something, that's where you want to have the public comment before you take the vote and after somebody's made a motion to do whatever it is you're going to do. Thank you, Fred Bolt.
Actually, what I was trying to do was trying to give the audience a better, and lack of a better word, sorry, a better aspect to relate to the committee, because we're not going to have any voting items for a little while that I understand. And so by having something in the middle, in the early time, that would give you a chance to see what the interaction the committee has, and if you've had something you'd like to say, it would give you a better earlier opportunity that we could possibly get to before the end of the meeting. That was my comment. I think on an action item for voting purposes, I don't think we're going to be doing a whole lot of voting in these meetings, so theoretically we wouldn't have as many action items to do that. So I think we could probably do something with that principle in the future. Does that sound reasonable to the committee? So I guess we could work out with that. So we can do the beginning and the end, and we could actually, since I've already opened it up to the public after we about closed it anyway, if that's feasible, we can always do that to say, are there comments during the meeting? And since it might be longer, we might be able to do something on that. Judy?
Judy DeShane. On the city council, the planning commission, all that, they have the opening comments and the ending comments, for public comments. Beyond that, it's whether or not it's something, I'm going to guess, if they see us with really terrific, anxious looks on our faces, something that they will ask for comments on various agenda items. But public comment isn't, other than the beginning and the end, it's not ever on an agenda, so it's just up to you. If you see us all going nuts over here over something you're discussing, maybe it'd be a good idea to have public comment. I mean, that's just kind of how it works. They just don't put it in after each item. It's kind of up to who is running the meeting. Well,
My understanding, that's where I'm trying to get a better understanding of the open meeting laws. I think we are a little restricted, and we can't. So by just the flexibility I'm doing right here, I'm not sure how much I can get in trouble in the future.
I don't see where there's a problem with it. Like I say, there's nothing on any of the agendas other than the opening and the ending, which is a required public comment. After any of the agenda items, there's nothing that says there's going to be public comment or there isn't. Now, generally, if it's an action item, yes, there always should be, so that the public can weigh in before you actually vote. But on other things, there isn't anything that says it is or isn't. And I've been both times, where it's just been a discussion like you're having here tonight, and they've asked for if anybody had something to add, the public. Other times they don't. It's just a conversation. So I don't think it has to be that stringent. So you could be a little more flexible.
I'm happy to be as flexible as we're allowed to be.
But I do think we can manage that as we move forward, where there are items that there's gonna be a action taken, that maybe we would anticipate some public feedback. We could make it clear that there's a public comment period for that actual item.
Okay, and maybe if we can just even put in, if the agenda can include that we can work with the comments during the meeting, if that makes it easier for the open laws, I'm happy to have that, if that staff can include that into the agenda item. We're just somewhere at the beginning or something that.
Yeah, we can see what we can do with that.
We will work with open comments through the meeting the best we can or something like that. That way, we've covered our tail just in case something comes up. Anything else? So I think we are ready to close the meeting. And I suppose if we're doing the regular meeting, I ask for closure. Do I get a first?
All first.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
And so the meeting is adjourned. There's no other comments.
No, you have to vote.
Huh?
All in favor?
Oh, all in favor? Aye. So one last detail, sorry.
So you did take an action.
You don't have